All right, so like I said, this is the Texas AgrAbility Lunch and Learn series, funding for agriculture assistive technology. My name is Mackenzie Thomas. I'm the program coordinator and co-PI here with Texas AgrAbility. And we have a special guest with us today, Lee Holmesley with TWC VR, and I will introduce her to you more formally in just a second. But today we're going to be covering Texas Workforce Commission's vocational rehabilitation and utilizing VR for agriculture operations, as well as funding for assistive technology for farmers and ranchers. And then I will kind of, through the discussion, talk about how Texas AgrAbility plays into that vocational rehab and supporting farmers and ranchers with assistive equipment. So Texas AgrAbility is funded through the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We are a grant-funded project, and there are, I think, 21 or so other AgrAbility projects throughout the nation. So this is a nationwide program. And so if you are not in Texas or have counterparts in other states, there's a good chance that there will be an AgrAbility project that covers those areas as well. As a state project, we have a couple of partners. The AgriSafe Network is one of our partners, as well as the Brazos Valley Center for Independent Living. So we provide services to individuals with disabilities, chronic health conditions, and functional limitations in agriculture. And so really quickly, I just wanted to kind of poll the audience and see, before we get into Ms. Holmesley's presentation, see kind of where you're from, what kind of brings you here. So I'm going to launch a poll question. You should be able to just click on the response and check all that apply. And if it's not working, we'll figure it out then. But you should see a poll question come up now. So we'll give you a few minutes to answer those.
I don't see it yet.
Is anyone else seeing that poll question pop up?
I don't see it either.
Not yet.
It says check
It's
all
in the
that
chat.
apply.
It's in the chat.
Okay, it's in the chat. So it may show up in the chat for you guys. Mine, it kind of popped up in its own window. But you may have to click the chat button. All right. Give you a couple more seconds to respond. All right, so it looks like about 20% of you guys come from vocational rehabilitation, about 16% are from extension, about 25% are farmer ranchers, 16% would be individuals with disabilities, and about 25% are military veterans or active duty military. So that gives us a good idea of kind of where we're coming from, a little bit all over the place, but very true to like the demographic that we serve here with Texas AgrAbility. So I appreciate your response on that. And so we'll go ahead and get into Lee's presentation. So Lee Holmesley is a licensed professional counselor with 11 years experience in vocational rehabilitation. She started as a transition counselor, then served an adult caseload for about 5 years before moving into program specialist position. She serves Waco, Temple, Killeen, and Gatesville. She is married to an aerospace engineer from Alabama and has 3 daughters from her first marriage, ages 18, 17, and 11, and a Beagle Shepherd mixed rescue dog named Nova. Lee enjoys gardening and being outdoors in general. Her granny and uncle were both farmers their entire lives. Her sister, and 4 cousins grew up building fence, working cattle, and hauling hay. Her best childhood memories include jumping in her uncle's pond for a swim after a long day hauling hay while Granny cooked chicken fried steak and mashed potatoes with gravy for supper. So with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing and turn it over to Leah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of vocational rehabilitation services. And then if anybody has any questions in particular about how we partner, I'll try to kind of explain that as I go through. But if anybody has any questions or anything, just raise your hand or unmute yourself and just let me know as you go, okay?
And I can help you monitor the chat and stuff too as well, Leah.
Okay. Okay, can y'all see my
Yes,
my
ma'am.
presentation? Okay. All right, so the vocational rehabilitation is a division under the Texas Workforce Commission. So Texas Workforce includes divisions for unemployment insurance, for child care services. We have workforce boards that provide services to businesses and job seekers. But the purpose of the Workforce Center is to provide workforce development to workers and then to connect them with employers. So that's an overall, an overview of what the Texas Workforce Solutions is. Like I said, we're just a division under Texas Workforce Commission. Started out as Texas Rehab Commission years ago, moved to DARS when I was first started working for the agency. And then back in, I think, 2016, we moved under the Texas Workforce Commission. But our division specializes in working with people who have disabilities. The disability has to be a chronic condition. It can't be an acute condition that, like a fracture that can be resolved with a little bit of time. It's something that is ongoing and that it's affecting employment. We provide services to adults. We provide transition services. We also provide services to businesses. And I'm speaking mostly for adult services because, the eligibility criteria for adult and transition is the same. But most of our farmers and ranchers that need assistance are adults and have acquired a disability over a period of time. We are an eligibility-based program. It's an eligibility and need-based program. So we help individuals prepare for employment. We help them obtain employment, and then we help them advance in employment. We also, under our adult services, have the program Older Individuals Who Are Blind. That is specifically for individuals who have visual impairments, but they're not wanting to work. So there's not a work requirement for that. Some of the things that our agency can do, we provide career counseling and guidance. That's the main thing that we provide through vocational counseling services. We can provide employment services, disability-related skills training, assistive technology, academic and vocational training, some other support services, and then some transportation assistance. Where the AgrAbility project falls, it falls under the employment services and then assistive technology. So our policies that relate to rehabilitation technology would apply to the assistive technology that you would possibly need as a farmer or a rancher, where Texas AgrAbility would come in and provide like an assessment and make recommendations about things that are needed. And then they would, you could potentially receive funding. That being said, we do have limits. There's approval processes. So some of that, it's really important that that your Texas AgrAbility representative, and if you're receiving VR services, your VR counselor, are meeting together with you and talking about the things that you might need, and kind of working through that process together. The other part of it is employment services. If you are a farmer and rancher, you're probably self-employed. So our policies for self-employment are a little bit different than they would be for traditional employment. So that also means there's some extra steps that you would have to take if you're coming in and you're already self-employed as a farmer or rancher, Or if you are coming in, maybe, for instance, I had a customer one time who had some cattle and it supplemented his income, but he obtained a disability later in life and wanted to make that his primary source of income. And so then he was starting as, he was requesting assistance to actually start a business as a farmer rancher. So there's a little bit, the policies are a little bit different depending on how you come in and the types of services that you're requesting, if you're already self-employed or if you're wanting to start a business. But that's where Vocational Rehab and Texas AgrAbility can partner to provide a smooth transition for that as well. Our eligibility requirements to receive VR services. You have to be present in the state of Texas, so you have to be a Texas resident. You have to be legally eligible to work. So what that means is we have to have documentation like an ID, your I-9 documents, an identification card, and then the Social Security card or a passport that says that you're eligible to work in Texas. Oh, sorry. You have to have a disability that results in a substantial impediment to employment. So once you're referred to our agency, it's your VR counselor's responsibility to gather your medical documentation. They'll talk to you. They'll do a diagnostic interview with you and talk about how your disability is affecting employment. And as a part of that, then they'll determine whether or not it's considered a substantial impediment to employment. You have to require VR services to either prepare for employment, obtain employment, or advance in employment. What that means is if there's nothing that our agency can provide to assist you, then you might not be determined eligible for services, but your VR counselor would talk to you about all that as well. And then the last thing that we look at is we have to be able to assume that once you receive our services, you're going to be able to achieve a successful employment outcome. And what that means is for our program is you have to show that you're going to be able to work and make a livable wage. The disabilities that we serve physical disabilities, psychological and neurodevelopmental disorders, sensory disabilities like hearing impairments, vision impairments. And then this just tells you how you can apply for VR services. We do have a new Start My VR site that you can go in and do a self-referral through just by going to the twc.texas.gov and then looking under the job seekers and vocational rehab. And then that will automatically get assigned to the office that's closest to your zip code. And then this is just my information. So if anybody had any questions after the meeting today and just wanted, I mean, you can live anywhere in the state of Texas. I can figure out who your direct contact would be and get you connected with the office closest to you. But I guess that's all I have. Are there any questions so far?
Feel free to leave questions either in the chat or there's also a Q&A button there if y'all have any questions. I will say also Texas AgrAbility has kind of a referral process as well. So if you come in to AgrAbility as a client of ours and say, hey, I'm needing some assistance and we think a referral to VR would be beneficial for you, we can refer you to them as well. And the one benefit of that is sometimes, especially in a more urban area, the VR counselor may not be as familiar with, you know, opportunities for farmers and ranchers through self-employment and those kind of things. So it's helpful sometimes for us to do a referral to VR, so that way the counselor has our contact information up front and we can kind of help them along through that process. Because most of the time I would say this is a counselor's first time going through this process is when they're doing it with us. So that is also an option if you're a little hesitant to do a self-referral, or you feel like you might need a little bit of help through that process. We can also do a referral for you guys. Then we had a question, let's see, in the chat that says, I have a full-time employment. Would I qualify for some of your services? So I'm assuming that means full-time employment that is not your agriculture operation. You can correct me if I'm wrong. He said correct. So
Okay.
if somebody has full-time employment, because a lot of our clients do, they might be employed. Like for example, me, I mean, this is my daytime job, but we also have, a farm on the side. So.
Okay, so it depends. You have to okay, so you have to meet our eligibility criteria, right? So you have to have a documented impairment. You have to it has to be a substantial impediment to employment. You have to need our services, and we have to be able to show that you're employed and can sustain that employment afterwards. If you're talking about advancing in a career, that's one area, but it would really depend on if this is something like if you have full-time employment and this is just something you do to supplement your income. I don't know. I don't know if there would be services, but I mean, it's always worth a conversation with a VR counselor, and I would be more than willing to have that conversation with you. All you have to do is just call me and let me know, because it really is going to depend on what your goal is.
And I'll just give a little bit of insight, kind of bouncing off of that too. We've had a couple of people who maybe on paper you say, okay, well, they're employed somewhere, so they wouldn't be eligible for their farm because they already have employment, but maybe it's a job that doesn't have a good option to move up at all. Like maybe they're just working, at a minimum wage job, but they have to work until they get their farm more accessible. And so we have had a couple of people that have been supported because the goal was to be more successful and have a better income and a better employment outcome in the long term with their ag operation that they wouldn't get with their current employment. And so it's not always impossible to get support not in your current occupation, but like she said, I think it just really depends. And then we had a question. It says, how does your program consider VA disabilities? For example, 100% total disability from the VA.
So, so we have to use whatever comparable benefits that you have available as a veteran. So, we have people that are receiving our services and receiving VA services. We just have to make sure that we're not duplicating things that the VA should be providing. And so we would work with you to ensure that whatever you're requesting is not something that the VA should be providing for you. But we do have customers who are vocational rehab and veterans with VA benefits. Did that answer your question?
And you can feel free to unmute yourself if you want to discuss this too. If you have if that didn't answer your question. Oh, he said yes. And then Aaron asked, thank you, Lee. This is great. Can you give us some best practices, maybe some language that our farmers or rangers can use when they request VR services?
So essentially what you're requesting as a farmer or rancher is rehabilitation technology. It's specific to AgrAbility because they're the ones that would they're the ones that we would partner with. But what you're asking for is rehabilitation technology to be able to perform the functions of your job. I would say if you have anybody that, and again, anybody can reach out to me. So if you have any issues with your local office and maybe they don't, and we have had a lot of turnover. So we have some counselors that aren't aware of this. And there's just a little bitty, like one link, I think, in our policy. And so they may not be able to find it. And I can direct them to that and then explain to them that this would be this would fall under the rehabilitation policy of our rehabilitation technology policy, and then give them the link to AgrAbility, but always making sure that they have a person that they can contact and talk to at AgrAbility is helpful, because then if they have any questions, they can reach out and say, hey, this is what they're requesting. Can we kind of start working on that process and see if there's something that VR can do to assist?
And they'll likely ask if you are a VR customer already and you want us to be involved with your case, you will likely have to submit a release of information that just states, and we have an example of one kind of already filled out with our information on it, so that they have approval to talk to us about your case. And we're not like digging for medical information or anything. It's just so that we can all stay on the same page on, what your goals are and, what you guys have talked about in your meetings with your vocational rehab counselor, and then what, we might be able to provide on the agriculture and farm assessment side. I think another thing that is maybe something that farmers and ranchers might need to know is you're really looking at self-employment in agriculture. A lot of times we talk to our clients and they'll say, well, it's not self-employment, I'm a farmer. And you are, but that is considered, self-employment in agriculture. So sometimes if you go in the office and you say, they ask, what is your employment goal? And you say, well, I don't want to be, employed. I just want to farm. That is your employment goal. So I think it's important just to keep that in mind as you're really talking about self-employment in agriculture.
And Leah, this is Dr. Greenwelch, and just a quick note too is that we also support individuals who might be working with or on a farmer ranch with the farmer, so that y'all would then look at that situation as a employer employee type relationship. Just for an example, a gentleman working for a cotton farmer out of Lubbock, we've worked with y'all, knee injury for the employee, worked with the individual to help look at what his job tasks were and how we might be able to recommend some assistive technology. But then that becomes even, I don't want to say more dicey, but it does become employer employee VR AgrAbility. It adds in another layer of technicality in what we do. And so that gentleman, we worked with y'all to look at what he did, and one of the things he had to do, if you've ever seen a cotton bin, it's tall, it has lots of steps. We just worked through simple technology because it doesn't have to be a tractor lift. A big surveillance mirror on the top of that tractor, that cotton bin, in multiple places, allowed the individual to see the depth of cotton in that bin without having to get up all those steps while he was recovering from knee surgery. So, that's another layer, but it still involves accessibility and assistive technology.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had another question that says, how long does the process take once you're granted services and you've been assigned a CB-TAC advisor for feasibility?
That depends. It depends on a lot of different factors. So, and just in case anybody doesn't know, our CB-TAC advisors are our providers that help with self-employment. So they go through a whole process of determining whether or not this is feasible. They determine, they help you do a business plan. And they know the process that you have to go through the state through the VR program because it is a bit of it can be a bit of a booger. And so they're the ones that are going to kind of help you through that process. And it really kind of depends. It depends on, where you're at in terms of developing your own business. If you've never held a bit, never owned a business before, then they're going to talk to, it'll take a little bit more time to figure out, do you have the skills? Do you have, the, everything in place, the support, the bookkeepers, all of that kind of stuff. And so it kind of depends on, it really is going to depend on each individual as to how long that process takes, because once you go through feasibility, then there's an approval process. And then once you get through that, then there's another step. So there's quite a few steps in self-employment. I can't say that, I mean, it depends on how detailed your business plan is going to be. So if it's very simple, I mean, if your business is very simple and the business plan is very simple, it might be faster. If if your business plan is very comprehensive and detailed, then it's obviously going to take a little bit longer.
And I'll just add really quickly, if you are interested in VR services and you have a farm and maybe you don't have a business plan, it's decently common that farmers and ranchers may not have a business plan written down. They may have one in their head, but not on paper. And your disability affects your ability to put a business plan together on paper. For whatever reason, we can also contract with vocational rehab through Texas AgrAbility to help you get that plan together. So don't think, oh, well, I'm not able to do a business plan by myself and I don't know where to start. And, because of my disability, it really affects my ability to put all of these thoughts and, financials down on paper or crunch a bunch of numbers. We can consult with you one-on-one and kind of a agriculture business planning person to get a plan together that they would be able to determine, feasibility from a VR side. So that's an option. Don't think just because you're not able to do that independently that you would then, it would not be eligible or it wouldn't be feasible for you.
Yeah, and on the VR end, your counselor should be talking to you about all those different steps and trying to help you figure out if it's something that you can do on your own or if you need assistance.
Did we have any other questions? We had a question. When you sign up with Texas AgrAbility, are you registered into the VR system as a client? When are you registered into the state database system as a client?
So the answer to that is no. Texas AgrAbility can help refer you to our agency, but you still have to go through our application process to determine whether or not you're eligible for VR services in particular. And you can do that, like I said, anybody on this webinar can reach out to me and I can do an initial contact and get you assigned to a counselor in your area. Any counselor at any office can do that, but you can also do it through Start My VR, or you can have your Texas AgrAbility specialist refer you as well and get that process started.
All right, do we have any other questions? And feel free to, unmute yourself if you have, if you want to ask it verbally or want to discuss anything. All right, since I'm not seeing any questions just yet, I did want to kind of touch on what assistive technology may look like when it comes to a farm or ranch or in agriculture. So I know there's quite a few vocational rehabilitation counselors or people through the VR system that are on today. And so can you just kind of briefly touch on, what assistive technology may look like on a farm or ranch versus what someone might traditionally see with another business through VR?
You might be able to speak better to that. I have not
I mean, I
ever.
can.
Yeah, I haven't.
so-
I've seen things, but I have not purchased anything for a VR customer personally.
So a lot of times, whenever we have clients, if they're talking assistive technology through vocational rehab, it may things like iPads or computers or software to assist an individual with a disability. It's pretty common for vocational rehab to be able to provide. Related to a disability, but on a farm or ranch, it may look like a tractor implement, or extended steps on a tractor, or a tractor lift, so that an individual that has a mobility impairment can get into and out of their tractor. Hand controls on a tractor, but it could also be something like an automatic gate opener. It's not something that maybe is traditionally seen as assistive technology, but for somebody who's not able to get into and out of a vehicle or a tractor to open gates, that might be something that we recommend as assistive technology for them. So I just want to kind of touch on the fact that assistive technology, that word you can kind of think, okay, screen reader or things like that, but when it relates to agriculture, farms and ranches, it may look a little different. It may look like a tractor implement or something like that. We did have a couple of other questions. Aaron asked, if a veteran has 100% disability rating, can you please talk about employable versus unemployable rating and how that might play into employment services?
So, our eligibility criteria is different than what the VA has for the rating system for disability. What we're looking at is, after we provide services, can you work? In particular, for self-employment, we have to show that you can make at least minimum wage based on the number of hours that you're working. And that's, and then we have to show that over a certain period of time. So there's a time frame that we would look at in terms to determine whether or not you're considered a successful closure. But just in general, we don't have the same ratings as what the VA does. And so if there is something that you can do that's competitive and it's integrated employment or it's self-employment that you can make a livable wage, then we can look at providing employment services.
Is there potential that if an individual is a veteran, has a disability rating that is titled unemployable, that they could affect their benefits if they then become employed?
That would be a question for the VA, for your VR. That would be a question for the VA.
And I think, there's a lot of things that have to be kind of explored through this process.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just always something, to maybe ask questions about. If you are a veteran and you're interested and you say, okay, well, I have a 100% disability rating and, it says unemployable. And so I get these benefits based on that. If you become employed, how could that affect it? And so there's benefits, kind of counselors that are within the VR system. I know that we've reached out to before, but also through the VA. But those are definitely questions. If that's kind of your, if you're in that situation, that's something that you would probably need to explore before you just start your self-employment and then realize it may affect some of your benefits.
And that would be the same thing with Social Security disability benefits.
So another, Alicia asked, can you share some success stories of someone building a large scale operation with your assistance? I mean, we have a couple of examples. I will say that everybody's situation is different. Everybody's business plan is different. Everyone's disability is different, how that affects them. So, you cannot really compare, my neighbor got XYZ with VR support or, at this rate. And so I can expect the same thing because everything is so dependent on your situation and your goals and your employment goals. But some things that we have recommended and have been supported. And I don't know about, your definition of a large scale operation. But for example, we have a client in the Panhandle that has around 12,000 acres and a cattle operation. And so, they had, in their business plan, there's a livable wage to be supported with that amount of income and cattle and their operation. It was full-time employment for them. And so some things that we recommended were the individual was in a wheelchair. And so that using, mobility aids like tracked wheelchair, looking at hand controls and things for farm equipment or vehicles that are used on the farm, cattle feeding aids like, automatic feeders so that they're not trying to get, a bag of feed out to feed, 200 head of cattle each week, and things like that. So, it's just general most of the time it's accessibility concerns that we're addressing and the ability to, take care of your farm or your animals or get around your place a little bit easier. And we can discuss with you if you're interested more on like a personal level, one-on-one, on like what your operation might be and ways that examples that we think might relate to your situation. But we have a lot of examples of individuals who've worked with VR to get assistive technology to help them be successful on their farm.
This is just an example to calculate. But if
Did anyone have any other questions?
Mackenzie, I thought I heard somebody speaking, but it was so quiet I couldn't hear what they were saying.
Same.
Okay. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, put it in the chat, or unmute yourself.
That may have been just from the names I can see, either Jose or Kent. I didn't have my screen open to it, but whichever one of you just asked, if you could ask that again, but closer to your microphone.
that wasn't me.
Can you ask your question again? Sorry, we missed it.
That question didn't come from me.
This is Jose. I didn't ask a question either.
Okay. Well, if y'all have any questions, feel free to leave those in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. I can, if we have a couple minutes, I can kind of show an example. And again, this is not something that I would say you should expect as, if you're working with VR, that this will be the case for you, just because it's so dependent on your goals and your employment goal, your disability, things like that. But I will show an example just so you can see how this might work in practice. Make sure it shares. All right, can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
So this is just an example. So this individual had 7 acres in Central Texas. They were doing vegetable production, had a military veteran, and some of their disabilities include a back injury, PTSD, TBI, and knee injuries. And so obviously with something, they had like a market garden operation, something like that. There's a lot of difficulty with planting and harvesting, riding their tractor for extended periods of time, and connecting and disconnecting implements, things like that. So I'll just show you some of the recommendations we made, with keeping in mind that some of these recommendations were funded by the client and some of them were funded partially by vocational rehab. So but I'll just kind of give you some examples of what assistive technology may look like for a farmer. So one thing we recommended were these rear view cameras, so that the individual, because of his back injury, wasn't having to turn around and look behind him as he's plowing or things like that. That tended to be a real barrier for him on being able to ride the tractor for extended periods of time, and cause a lot of extra strain on his back and the rest of his body, just being turned around all the time. So because of this, he was able to ride the tractor for longer, get more work done, which led to, a more successful employment outcome. Another one was he was laying plastic mulch by hand. And so we recommended, this is a plastic mulch layer. It's an implement on a tractor that also lays irrigation line as you go. So a lot of that's, done mechanically instead of by hand, which, helps him be more successful. It helps with irrigation and laying the plastic, it's better for weed control. So there was tons of reasons why that was, recommended as part of his plan. We also recommended extended steps for his tractor, the canopy for his tractor, and a better seat for his back injury. There's also some planting aids so that he can plant things standing up and isn't having to bend over, which was really affecting his back and knees. So I just wanted to kind of share that as part of, an example of what assistive technology recommendations might look like on a farmer ranch. And so also, as part of being a Texas AgrAbility client, we can offer one-on-one consultation with the client on what their needs are, what their goals are, and what might be possible for them based on, the types of equipment that is out there, what ways we might be able to assist, things that VR might be able to help support. But we can also support the VR counselors with their IPE development, looking at what might be feasible as far as like an agriculture standpoint. We've had individuals who, with disabilities that have wanted to work full time on their farm, but they wanted to plant 2 or 3 blueberry bushes. And so, trying to work through that process to see what's feasible. That's something that we can consult with VR counselors on, as well as looking for vendors for the assistive technology we recommend, getting quotes, things like that. So if you're a VR counselor on today and you're like, I wouldn't know where to start with, finding equipment and getting vendors and all of those things, we are happy to consult with you on those issues that you might have, and help, work through that with you as well. And then we also support the VR clients through the business planning and making assistive technology recommendations and doing those on-site farm and ranch assessments. So I'll leave it open for some questions again, if y'all have any other questions.
And Mackenzie, I think the biggest thing is just making sure that the counselor and AgrAbility are connected early in the process. because it is done so infrequently with VR that we do have a lot of counselors who have never done it before or have never even heard of it before. And so to be able to connect with with Texas AgrAbility early in the process to, even just to start asking questions or kind of working through issues that y'all can see on y'all's end or we can see on our end. I think that's the biggest thing, is just making sure that there's a good connection there.
Right. Yeah, that's really important, I think, for the success of a case is just open communication between us, your counselor, and you. Sometimes and with the customer as well, if your counselor is having a hard time getting in touch with you and getting information from you, that really drags your case out because we're just waiting on, a medical document or some information, or they, try to call and get a quick question answered and it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get in touch with you. So just having good open communication can really go a long way in those cases and making sure everyone's on the same page. I think you're definitely right on that. Do you have any other questions before we kind of get into the last part of the webinar? I don't see anything right now, so I'm going to go ahead and we have just a few survey questions. If you've ever been on one of our webinars or trainings before, you know that, that we always have a survey at the end, but I'm just going to do them as poll questions. So I'll give you a few minutes to answer those. But feel free, even during this time, if you have any questions or think of anything, just leave those in the chat and we'll get to those. I'll stay on for a few minutes after the webinar as well. If you have anything you want to discuss afterwards, and then I'll also leave my contact information in the chat too if you have any questions for us. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. So if you don't see it pop up on your screen, just check the chat box and you should see the poll question there. All right. A couple more seconds to answer those. All right. And then the next question is just gauging your understanding of Texas AgrAbility before and after the webinar. All right. And there's only a couple more, I promise. The next one is your understanding of vocational rehabilitation before the webinar and then after the webinar. This helps us gauge if you learned anything from today's presentation. All right. And then last one, your understanding of funding options for agriculture assistive technology before the webinar and after the webinar. All right, it looks like everyone answered. I just want to thank Lee Holmesley again for her time today. She shared a lot of great insight on the vocational rehabilitation process and eligibility. And just want to thank her for her time today on that. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave those in the chat. I will stay on for another couple minutes. If you have any other questions or, want to get in touch with us, I'll also put my contact information in the chat. If you're interested in AgrAbility services or, learning more about this process, being referred to VR or things like that. You can also, visit our website for more information and examples of those assistive technology pieces and things like that. And then I'll also share. This is our AgrAbility's contact information up on the screen, but I'll also put my email in the chat for you guys. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put those in the chat. And thank you again, Leah, for your time today on our webinar.
Thank you.
I forgot to mention too, if anyone is interested in viewing this afterwards, we have recorded it, and so we will be able to post that and share with those if anybody else is interested.